Hi, Matt Loveland. This is my LUT1 presentation of my LAT paper. My paper mostly focused on critical events which led to today's technology that we experience with the internet and with personal computers. ARPANET would be one of the precursors to the internet. It was originally conceived back in the 1950s, created back in the 1960s. It was the first time in which computers were networked together. This is just an image of what ARPANET looked like back in the 1970s. Al Gore, actually back in the early 1990s, late 80s, passed legislation in Congress which allowed commercial use of ARPANET, which is what has led to what we consider the internet today. This is images of backbones of the internet provided by 4 different commercial entities. From there, we're going to jump to another key milestone would be the personal computer, which was an advent, which was created in the it was actually thought of back in the 1970s, but in the 1980s is what we're going to focus on with the Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 was not the only personal computer which was conceived back then. Apple, for instance, had the Apple II. Apple II's main problem, the reason why it didn't reach critical mass, I believe, is basically because they didn't have such an open source aspect to it. They were more of a proprietary base, which would mean that all the peripherals and printers, mice, all those kind of things, all the programs had to be written by Apple, which kind of stifled competition and innovation. Commodore, though, freed itself by allowing other entities to be able to join in creating it. Also, the Commodore is still today the #1 selling computer model in history. Commodore 64 was really known for graphics and marketed towards youth. Today, mixing in the networking capability of computers and the saturation of computers inside of society, computers are secondhand to us. They're within our cell phones, they're flying airplanes. This is an image of a cockpit of an A320 Airbus. This is an A320 Airbus also. The reason why I picked this image is this is a Qantas airplane several years ago. The Qantas computer told the plane to dive because the Qantas computers thought that the plane was about to stall because the nose was pitched too high. It canceled out the pilot's controls, which caused the plane to dive. A lot of people thought it was very close to crashing, but that never actually happened. But it puts into point, though, the amount of trust that we put into computers, sometimes wrongly. Just a couple days ago, though, there was a Northwestern flight which flew right over Minneapolis by 150 miles. People believe that the pilots may have been asleep. Who was flying the plane? Obviously the computer. So you've got kind of a back and forth there. Pharmacies, for instance, today are able to cross-reference prescriptions to be able to make sure there's no drug interactions. Moving on from there, another aspect of computing and networking that we have today would be social interaction. This is just an image from Facebook with like my friends and how we know each other. But it just kind of illustrates how it's changing the way that we communicate, it being the internet and personal computing. It changes the way that we communicate, we socialize, the way that we buy drugs, obviously. The way we drive has even been affected by computers. And so basically that's my presentation. I'm going to go now turn to question time to be able to answer those.
Before commercial access to ARPANET, what content was on networks?
The content that was on network would have been whatever content was specifically on that network and only that network. For instance, if you were an AOL member previous to access to ARPANET, the only content that you had would have been AOL content, AOL News, AOL chats, AOL Instant Message, and AOL email would only be for AOL members. Next question.
Why didn't Commodore 64 last?
The Commodore 64, obviously, you would think that it would still be a household name at this point. but it is not. The end of Commodore 64 basically would have been kind of akin to why a band broke up. The original founders actually squabbled about what direction to take the company. Some people wanted to focus on game consoles because the Commodore 64 was very graphic and visual when it first came out. Others wanted to focus on the actual core business, which was the computer. By the end, this failure to agree as to the direction of the company ended with its failure and ultimate bankruptcy. So anyway, that is my presentation, and appreciate your taking the time.